Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation, Self-Monitoring of Blood Glucose in Type 2 Diabetes. So just to review the proposal, diabetes affects about 9.3% of the population and about 90 to 95% of these with Type 2 diabetes. Self-monitoring of blood glucose is a common self-management strategy. It can help prevent complications, but past research has been inconsistent about whether or not it works well with people who have type 2 diabetes. Some studies seem to show that it helps them to bring down their hemoglobin A1C levels, which is a common marker, and some don't show that effect. So in this review, we were looking for the association between the type of intervention strategy and improvement in hemoglobin A1C levels, and also the association between the intervention strategy and quality of life. So we were using systematic review for this study, and we looked at evidence from randomized controlled trials that had been previously done on this topic. The inclusion criteria for this review included English studies, studies that were US-based and published since 2005 to get the most recent and relevant information, studies focused on adults 18 and over with type 2 diabetes, studies that were focused on self-monitoring of blood glucose as opposed to focusing on many different self-management techniques, studies with outcome measures of hemoglobin A1C or psychosocial measures, randomized control trials, and other semi-experimental designs. So I have a slide here about the combined effects and interpretation. So the forest plot that I have here refers to the pooled effect of self-monitoring of blood glucose on A1C levels that I found in my studies. So as you can see here, the pooled effect of the self-monitoring is a decrease of 0.22% in the average hemoglobin A1C levels of the participants. So on average, the interventions did show that the use of self-monitoring was successful in lowering A1C. This correlates with findings of previous systematic reviews, which have shown a decrease anywhere from 0.16% to 0.39%. So as you can also see here, I'm missing some information on the Greenwood study. I'm still waiting for the SDs to be sent from the author of that study. So the first research question was looking for the association between the type of intervention strategy and hemoglobin A1C levels. So the 8 studies that were included used a variety of strategies to get their participants to self-monitor. The ultimate goal for all of them was to see participants' hemoglobin A1C levels go down, meaning that their blood sugar levels were staying lower over time. So all of these studies ended up showing improvement in hemoglobin A1C levels, but 2 studies showed significantly more improvement in the intervention arms, suggesting that there was a treatment effect. These 2 are listed above, Polanski and Greenwood. So what did these studies have in common? Both used these 3 strategies: structured self-monitoring, meaning that they were instructed to do monitoring at certain times. They specially trained healthcare providers on how to modify their diabetes treatment based on these glucose readings that the participants were taking. And they also provided education and feedback on the glucose levels for the participants. So some of the other studies did use these same strategies, but they maybe used 1 or 2 of them, and not all 3. The research question number 2 looked for the association between intervention strategies and quality of life. So the 8 included studies used a variety of measures to look at attitudes and quality of life in their participants. Some of these measures included affect, general well-being, self-efficacy, to name a few. In most of the studies, the intervention participants didn't show any more improvement in attitudes than the control arm. So that suggests that these strategies, while some of them may have improved hemoglobin A1C, they didn't really go very far to improve attitudes. A few exceptions: the Moreland study, the participants in that study in the intervention, from the beginning to the end of the study, they showed less negative attitude towards self-monitoring than the control arm did. In the Polanski and Fisher studies, which are based on the same parent study, the intervention participants that were actually adherent to all the suggestions that were given to them improved in general well-being and motivation and self-efficacy. It's important to note with this one that the intervention participants that didn't follow all the instructions didn't show any improvement. There were several limitations to this review. The first is the issue of missing and incorrect data. This could affect the validity of the results. 6 studies that met the criteria couldn't be obtained due to expense or access. There was no access to MBase, which is a large database, and using MBase may have found additional research to include. I was not able to search the gray literature, unpublished literature, and so that may mean that this review is vulnerable to publication bias. And lastly, there was only one researcher, so I may not have been able to identify all the relevant studies, and I might have made errors during the research. The second issue is of the heterogeneity of the studies that were included. So the interventions ranged from 3 to 12 months, so that's a difference there. There were also population differences in the participants. Some of the study populations had a large percentage of one certain ethnicity. They had educational differences. So, to sum it up, the results of this review may not apply to other U.S. populations that have type 2 diabetes. There are a few recommendations that could be made using the results of this review. The first would be to repeat the review with more time and resources. If this were done, you could potentially capture more of the studies that weren't able to be obtained for this review. The second recommendation would be to look at cost effectiveness. This review did identify some successful strategies, but I would recommend for further research that any trials that were testing out these particular strategies would also do cost effectiveness studies before implementation. The third recommendation would be to do another systematic review focused on the question that I covered in my second research question, would be the quality of life issues for type 2 diabetes. And lastly, if further research does confirm the efficacy and cost effectiveness of the successful strategies that were identified here, then this could be used to refine the official self-monitoring of blood glucose recommendations that are put out there by groups such as the American Diabetes Association. I've included all my references for you all in case you're interested. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.